Let me start like this. What was the oddest phone call that you ever received? Think about it. For me, it was already quite a while ago. That was before I turned into an entrepreneur. I was still a consultant. I was a senior partner with a leading consulting firm. We got a phone call from the premier of an Asian country. On behalf of the president, he asked us for a 100-year strategy. And we were quite flabbergasted because we had never really received that question, a 100-year strategy. And so I can still remember how I feverishly went through all our frameworks, through all our toolboxes, all our client cases, but there wasn't really anything. There was a lot of techno-optimism, how everything will be good with technology. But a long-term strategy, that was a 3-year strategy, a very long-term strategy. There was a 10-year strategy, and it was always about how to outcompete in the short term and not about how to endure in the long term. So we went back to them, we presented to the president, and it didn't really lead anywhere. But in the end, they hired us for an industrial efficiency project. Now, that took me. And perhaps it took me because at the time I was reading a book from Paul Kennedy, and some of you might also have read the book. It's about the rise and the fall of great powers. And he has done research of big empires, the 16th century Spanish Empire. He has researched the 19th century British Empire, Germany in the 20th century, the US in the 20th century. And he came back with a very blunt conclusion that whenever a nation fails, it typically is related to the weakening of the infrastructural capacity of that power, and in relation to the political, military, or social commitments they have made. And he also finds that whenever a power started to get vulnerable and coercible, it was because of that outstrip. And he also explains how it has always been due to the assumption that these temporary economic advantages would be permanent, and they weren't. Now, I think that resonates. We can feel it to the bones. That's what Europe is right now, right here. The relentless chain of shocks onto our system, it's here and now. And we can also see it in the numbers, how we as European society, we have been losing infrastructural capacity. We have lost our global share of the productive capacity. We have lost a global share, of course, of our human capacity. We have also lost our global share of our military capacity. And if you look for pointers how that outstrips our commitments, the political, the social, and the military commitments we have made, there are pointers all over. One that I found quite interesting is how we are, in fact, unable to get ourselves behind it. So there's a rapid increase in the number of permanent opt-outs, of special regimes, of special treatments for European member states. Now, all of us, that takes us into a world where we as Europeans are coercible, we as Europeans are vulnerable. And if you translate it into the language of system engineers, it's because we have been overrating efficiencies and we have been taking too many redundancies, too much slack, and too many buffers out of the system. And now we have overinvested in shock amplifiers when we have underinvested in shock absorbers. And in the same way, a system engineer, if she designs a drug, software, a car, a power plant, she would always ask herself, have I built a good mix of shock amplifiers and shock absorbers into the system? And we come to the conclusion we haven't. The point I want to make here over the next minutes is that it is a politically urgent, economically attractive, and intergenerationally meaningful investment to strengthen our infrastructural capacity in Europe. And let me do that by wearing the 3 hats that I wear through life. The first one, let me talk about how we have pointers that our infrastructure is weakening. And let me sort of wear my professorial hat, the boring hat for that. Let me then talk about how this is changing now, because we have ended up in a world where vulnerability starts getting priced. A completely new world. So that's where I'm wearing my former infrastructure consulting hat. And then finally, let me say, there is one particularly potent type of infrastructure that is particularly underinvested, and that is thriving ecosystems nature. And there is a plan at hand how to change that and make nature our most critical infrastructure, a European essential infrastructure plan. Now, where does Europe stand right now? We are coercible, we are vulnerable. There is this one letter from hell which talked about civilizational erasure. So for the first time here, we are faced with external and internal pressures. The US has turned from a military and political shield to a constitutional and territorial threat. We are faced with a Russia that forces us to defend not only our borders, but also our critical infrastructure, also our media. And we are confronted with a China that is not just competing for industrial markets, but it's also competing for international partnerships and for the new political norm. Now, and that happens at a moment where we are weakened because we are sitting on a bunch of infrastructure that is clearly not fit for a 2 degrees world, which is clearly riddled with dependencies that we have built over the years, and which is clearly not able to drive and to support the growth that we have politically promised. And that happens at a moment where a lot of things are actually absolutely clear if you listen to the scientific and to the expert community when it comes to infrastructure. The first thing we know is that infrastructure is a good investment. All great powers, all meaningful economies have invested ahead of their productivity increase for 1 or 2 generations. Britain has invested into the bridges, into the roads, into the channels. China has massively invested into industrial capacity well ahead of its productivity increase. So that we know, it's a good investment, it pays late, but it pays. The second thing that is absolutely undisputed within the scientific community, that we are underinvesting by anything between 2 or 3 percentage points of GDP when it comes to soft and hard infrastructure, those shock absorbers that we need in our economy. All the advanced economies, particularly Europe, where we can observe that the formation of our public capital stock has been plateauing for a couple of decades now. And if we reinvest, then reinvest about at the level of our depreciation. So net investment is almost zero. We are just about keeping our infrastructure stock stable. And the third thing that we know, and there is also remarkable agreement on that, what kind of infrastructure is it really that we need? When it comes to energy systems, of course, they need to be decarbonized, diversified, they need to be well connected across Europe, need to be backed up by storage, they need to be well connected. When it comes to our resource regime, of course, it needs to be built on circular principles. We need to get ourselves out of these single point dependencies. We have to make sure that we are not exhaustable by any one party. When it comes to our digital infrastructure, of course, it needs to be sovereign, not just the chips, not just the networks, of course, also the storage, also the AI, also the platforms, and also the messaging service and the searches. And when it comes to military, of course, it needs to be credibly available, deployable, and it needs to be also credibly deterrent. Now, if you allow me this, if you look at this list, and I'm sure Maya would agree with me, that this, in fact, reads almost or very close to what we thought the European Green Deal stands for. Not everything, but quite a lot. So this is a list that has been written straight out of the mindset of security and straight out of the mindset of Paul Kennedy. So this is not a climate agenda, and yet if you read it, it gets close to that climate agenda, and it's exactly offering the increase in security that we need right now, right here at an accelerated space. It's a way to decouple ourselves. Now, all of this is well known, and we have an understanding that investing into shock absorbers is a good investment so that societies are governable and productive not on a good day, but on a bad day. The question is, we don't quite know how to get there. So let me wear the consultant's hat for a moment. Read the signals of the market. We are entering a new market era in which the market is, in fact, starting to price vulnerability. We see it in insurances, which are either retreating or getting uneconomical, and we all remember the talk that Günther Tallinger has been giving here from Allianz a year ago. We all see that there is increasingly a spread or divergence of the premium between those assets that hold a lot of vulnerability and those that don't hold a lot of vulnerability. We can see that there is some generic fright of a major crisis, which leads to higher correlations. And we can see that more and more government balance sheets need to be used to bail us out. So, and overall, we see some real signals that those assets that are more invested into these shock absorbers have lower vulnerability and they fare higher at capital markets. There is a premium to resilience even here and even today. And that is... that's the kind of market climate that you expect ahead of a Minsky event. And what in these moments, what of course one must do, one must invest into those assets that are lower risk to move away as a private investor from to take some of those peak trade expectations when it comes to government to actually invest into shock-absorbing infrastructure as if it was a long-term asset on your sovereign balance sheet, and that would be the most important step really to ensure the only way to manage the future if we as government start to manage ourselves through balance sheets where you actually start borrowing against your long net assets. And the last thing is central banks. They really should consider all these shock absorbers in their stability frameworks. So in that world, we would be prepared for these shocks to come. And now let me wear the hat of the nature technology entrepreneur. What comes out of this is we need to invest into those infrastructures that are particularly potent, and the one infrastructure that is particularly potent to take us from a brittle to a very adaptive economy, thriving ecosystems, nature. Today, nature sits at the very top of the Maslow pyramid. It's the one thing that we do for self-esteem if everything else is settled. That's not true anymore in a new world where we have nature degradation, biodiversity loss, where we need to be prepared for a 2 degrees world, where we have massive conflict over land. Here, land sits at the bottom of the pyramid. Without it, there's no economy. Without it, we will see the rerouting of supply chains. We see the devaluation of infrastructure, and we see the withdrawal of capital. It's our most important infrastructure that supports directly 50% of our global GDP, that delivers us 140 trillion in ecosystem services every year, and that we depreciate by 7 trillion a year. We spend 3 times more on common agricultural policy in Europe than we spend on the preservation of nature. Now, there's one way out. We need to reclassify nature as critical infrastructure, and we have developed an essential infrastructure plan for Europe, which essentially says nature must have the legal status of any other infrastructure class, the same legal status, the same financial instruments, and the same fast-track mechanisms that we have established for energy or for transport. Then we need to build the digital infrastructure, and you know that, some of you know, it's particularly close to my heart. We have created a company where we are trying to build a digital twin for nature, so that we have a cadastre where every pixel of Europe actually could sit in a trusted registry, so that you can start establishing contractual relationship between those who are providing natural capital and those we need it. Then you need to to coin a new type of company, which is an essential infrastructure company. And then we need to create nature markets. And these nature markets only work if we have a currency. And now we are closing the loop to exactly this place. 1.5 years ago, Stuchtey, there was the Commission President standing here, and she was talking about something that Europe wants to invent right now, which is a nature capital unit, colloquially a nature credit, a currency for nature. It was the first time proposed here, and the policy process is running right now. Now, that would be an innovation worth of Europe. Now, let me, as I close, open the aperture one more time. On the one hand, there is a technical requirement for us to be enduring societies, which is to build the technical infrastructural capacity. There's a second book, which I also then read, which is Why Nations Fail, from Asimoglu and from Robinson. And they observed that every single nation, every single society that prevailed is, in addition, and that's the sufficient and not just the necessary condition, has always been one that is open and that is participative and that is intergenerational. Now, we talked about the age of plenty this morning. What we really need is plenty for all, Wohlstand für alle. So that is my last sentence, Stuchtey. So that in other words, we need to create the security, the external security, economic, but we also need to create human security to be enduring systems. Thank you a lot, Stuchtey.